The West Coast is bracing for a 9.0 megaquake, and scientists are calling it America's deadliest threat. There's a fault line sitting off the coast right now that hasn't produced a major earthquake in 325 years. And the reason experts are genuinely losing sleep over it isn't what you think. It's not just the shaking. It's not even the tsunami. Both of those will be catastrophic on their own. The real reason scientists are terrified is what happens in the 2 hours after the ground finally stops moving. In those 2 hours, a chain reaction begins that almost nobody is talking about. A fuel spill the size of a major oil disaster. A river catching fire, running straight through the middle of a major American city. A toxic cloud drifting over neighborhoods where people cannot escape because every road out is already destroyed. And the very people whose job is to stop all of this, the firefighters, the paramedics, the rescue crews, they'll be trapped in the same broken city as everyone else. No water in the hydrants, no way through the wreckage. Scientists agree the earthquake is coming. What they're not sure of is whether the earthquake itself will be the deadliest part of this story. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what's waiting on the coast and why the real disaster might not be the one everybody's expecting. Let's start from the beginning. The fault at the center of this story is called the Cascadia Subduction Zone. It runs for roughly 700 miles underwater, just offshore from Northern California, up through Oregon and Washington, and continuing on into British Columbia. Along that entire length, a slab of ocean floor called the Juan de Fuca Plate is slowly sliding underneath the much larger North American plate. This process, called subduction, is one of the most powerful geological forces on Earth. It's the reason the Cascade mountain range exists at all, including volcanoes like Mount St. Helens and Mount Rainier. As the ocean floor dives into the Earth's mantle, the heat and pressure generate the magma that eventually pushes those peaks upward. Subduction is impressive geology, but the part of it that concerns us today isn't the volcanoes. It's what happens when the two plates get stuck. Right now, the Juan de Fuca Plate and the North American Plate are locked together along a boundary stretching hundreds of miles. They're not sliding smoothly. They're grinding against each other so slowly that almost nothing happens at the surface for decades at a time. And all the while, the pressure between them keeps building. This is the fundamental danger of the Cascadia Fault, and it's different from how most people imagine earthquake faults work. Other major faults, like the San Andreas in California, release their stress in relatively frequent smaller earthquakes. You feel them. They cause damage. But the energy comes out in manageable amounts, spread over time. Cascadia does the opposite. It locks for centuries, storing energy the entire time, and then it lets all of it go at once. Every year that passes without a Cascadia earthquake is not a year of safety. It is a year of more stored energy, more pressure, a larger release quietly waiting to happen. When that release finally comes, scientists expect a magnitude somewhere in the high 8s to low 9s, a number most people cannot picture yet. And understanding what that number actually means is exactly where this story starts to get frightening. To understand what that magnitude actually means, you have to understand that the magnitude scale does not work the way most people assume. It's not a linear scale, where an 8 is just a little more than a 7. It's logarithmic. Each whole number step up represents roughly 32 times more energy released than the step below it. A magnitude 9 earthquake releases 30 times more energy than a magnitude 8. It does this by tearing along a much longer section of fault, and that extended tear is exactly why the shaking lasts so much longer. A magnitude 6 or 7 in California might shake the ground for 20 or 30 seconds. A full Cascadia rupture would shake the ground for 3 to 6 minutes. That doesn't sound like a long time until you're standing in it. Every additional second becomes an eternity, because buildings that might survive 30 seconds of strong shaking begin to fail the moment the motion refuses to stop. Along the coast closest to the fault, ground acceleration could briefly exceed 1 g, the equivalent of the full force of gravity. That's enough force to throw objects into the air rather than rattle them. Further inland, Portland and Seattle would feel the shaking somewhat less intensely, but they hold far more people, far more old buildings, and far more infrastructure built before modern seismic engineering standards ever existed. A significant amount of what those cities are built from was designed before scientists even accepted plate tectonics was real, built by people with no idea a fault like Cascadia could do what it's about to do. When the shaking finally reaches those cities, the region's lifelines are expected to fail together, not one at a time. Bridges, water systems, the electrical grid, fuel pipelines, rail lines, ports, and airports were largely never designed to survive this level of shaking. The current best estimate for the power outage is 6 to 12 months without electricity, across an entire region. Hold that number in your mind, because it's the exact background condition against which everything else in this story happens. The long-standing casualty estimate for a full Cascadia rupture is more than 30,000 dead and more than $81 billion in damage, which would make it the deadliest and most expensive natural disaster in American history. But here's the part that new research is adding to that picture. Those numbers may significantly undercount the actual death toll, because they focus primarily on what the shaking and the tsunami do directly. They may not fully account for what the shaking triggers in the first 2 hours afterward. And what it triggers is sitting in a specific location on the bank of the Willamette River, just outside downtown Portland, waiting. The place is called the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub. It's a collection of fuel storage and processing facilities clustered in a narrow corridor where the river bends close to the industrial edge of the city. The number attached to it is the one that concentrates the mind. Roughly 90% of all the liquid fuel for the entire state of Oregon passes through this single hub. Jet fuel for the airports, gasoline and diesel for the roads, heating fuel for homes, industrial lubricants for factories, everything. 9 out of every 10 gallons of liquid fuel in Oregon moves through this one location on its way to the rest of the state. If you wanted to design a single point of failure for an entire region's energy supply, you would design something that looks exactly like this hub. The tanks themselves are already a concern. Many of the large petroleum storage structures at the hub were built to seismic standards experts now consider inadequate, and a significant number of them went up before 1970, designed in an era when nobody believed Cascadia could produce the kind of earthquake that's now expected. But the deeper problem isn't the tanks. It's what they're standing on. The hub doesn't sit on bedrock. It sits on loose, sandy, water-saturated soil along a riverbank, and that specific type of ground has a property that makes it one of the single most dangerous surfaces on Earth during prolonged strong shaking. The property responsible for all of this is called liquefaction. Here's what it actually is, because it's one of the least intuitive things that physics allows anywhere on Earth. When you take loose, wet soil and shake it hard enough for long enough, the individual grains of sand temporarily lose contact with each other. The friction between them disappears. And when that happens, the entire mass stops behaving like a solid and starts behaving like a liquid. Solid ground becomes something closer to dense quicksand. Buildings sink sideways into it. Buried pipes and underground tanks can actually float upward through it, because something denser than liquid sinks, and something less dense rises. Buried steel tanks full of air or fuel are less dense than liquefied soil. In a full Cascadia rupture lasting 3 to 6 minutes, liquefaction would not be a localized curiosity affecting one building or one block. It would propagate across entire districts simultaneously, precisely along the riverbanks where the region has concentrated its fuel storage. Now place the fuel tanks on top of that liquefying ground and run the shaking for 4 minutes. The tanks are being hammered from the outside by ground motion. The fuel inside sloshes back and forth with enough force to rupture the tank walls from within. Some tanks fail, because the soil beneath them gives way and they tilt and split. Others fail because the internal pressure from the sloshing fuel cracks the welds open. The combined result, according to hazard modeling conducted by the state of Oregon and independent research teams, is that roughly half of all the material stored at the hub could spill. That's not a tank leak or an industrial accident. That's a release of fuel comparable in total volume to the Deepwater Horizon disaster itself, the catastrophe that contaminated the Gulf of Mexico for months. Except this would happen in minutes, not months, into a river flowing straight through a city that has simultaneously lost its power, its water pressure, its bridges, and its ability to move emergency vehicles through streets that are simply no longer intact. The fuel doesn't sit still once it's out of the tanks. It moves. It flows. Gravity and the river current take it downstream. The Willamette flows north through the center of Portland before joining the Columbia River, which means a spill at the hub sends fuel upstream of homes, neighborhoods, parks, and bridges, rather than safely away from them. A petroleum spill of this size moving on a river isn't a stain on the water. It's a moving sheet of flammable liquid threading through a city. And in a city full of downed power lines, ruptured natural gas mains, and sparking electrical equipment, it doesn't need a person to light it. It only needs one spark from anywhere. In the immediate aftermath of a magnitude 9 earthquake, the city will produce sparks in hundreds of places at once. When the Willamette catches fire, the fire doesn't stay in one spot where crews could surround it and fight it. Burning fuel on moving water rides the current. The fire front travels downstream, reaching new fuel as it goes, pulling against bridge pilings and debris, spreading to both banks as it moves. In an ordinary large fire, responders use hydrant water, pumper trucks, and aerial resources to contain it. Here, the hydrant system is down because the water pipes have failed. The road network is blocked by collapsed overpasses and liquefied streets. The fire crews who would normally be called in from neighboring jurisdictions are themselves trapped in the same disaster zone, trying to reach their own families and their own communities first. One of the places that Burning River can reach is Forest Park, roughly 5,200 acres of continuous urban woodland covering Portland's West Hills, one of the largest continuous urban forests found in any American city. Dry late summer conditions, the most likely season for a Cascadia rupture, would make it highly flammable. A fire reaching Forest Park under those conditions could threaten an estimated 70,000 people living in and around those hills, with no firefighters available to stand between them and the flames, and no navigable roads leading out of the hills. This particular combination, earthquake, fuel spill, river fire, and urban forest fire, echoes something from the most instructive historical example in American disaster history. On April 18, 1906, a massive and devastating earthquake struck San Francisco directly. The shaking was devastating. But the death toll, estimated at around 3,000 people, was not primarily caused by collapsing buildings. It was caused by the fires that broke out afterward, burning through a city whose water mains had been ruptured by the quake, leaving crews with almost nothing to fight it with. The fire itself burned for 3 straight days and destroyed approximately 28,000 buildings. More than a century later, that exact same logic is sitting on the bank of the Willamette River, with one significant difference. The fuel load in 1906 San Francisco was whatever the buildings themselves happened to contain. The fuel load in a Cascadia scenario is 90% of the liquid fuel supply of an entire state, concentrated in one spot, ready to be released in minutes. And here's the first major element of this entire story that almost never appears in any coverage of the Cascadia threat. The fire is not the most toxic thing that will be released at the hub. It isn't even close. The critical energy infrastructure hub and the industrial facilities around it store more than petroleum. They also store anhydrous ammonia and chlorine gas, along with a long list of industrial chemicals that don't burn when they escape their containment. They disperse silently into the air as invisible gases, and then move wherever the wind takes them. Anhydrous ammonia, used in large quantities for refrigeration and industrial processes, is a severe respiratory hazard capable of causing fatal lung damage at concentrations well below what the human nose can reliably detect. Chlorine gas, famously, was used as a chemical weapon during the First World War. At the concentrations a major industrial release could realistically produce, it kills within minutes. This is the invisible half of the disaster, drifting silently and unseen over entire neighborhoods while everyone's attention stays fixed on the visible fire downtown. A specific hazard modeling study examined closely what would happen to these chemical inventories after a full Cascadia event. Under realistic wind conditions, with just 4 of the highest risk facilities included in the model, the worst-case scenario produced estimated deaths from toxic exposure alone of more than 2,500 people, with hundreds of thousands more people experiencing serious ongoing health effects. And it's worth remembering that those specific numbers came from modeling only 4 sites. The same study identified roughly 70 high-risk chemical facilities in the Portland area alone. And the study noted something that should be deeply uncomfortable for anyone planning for this event. The detailed inventory of exactly what's stored at many of these facilities, in what exact quantities, under what specific conditions, remains incomplete. Emergency planners simply cannot fully prepare for a hazard they haven't fully measured in the first place. The gap in that data quietly raises the ceiling on just how bad this entire scenario could actually get. The communities most exposed to the toxic cloud scenario, neighborhoods in North Portland near the hub, areas in the hills above it, and anyone caught in the path of the wind on the day of the event, face a very specific problem that the earthquake itself does not create entirely on its own. They cannot evacuate because the roads are gone, the bridges are down, and the exact same infrastructure failure that trapped the firefighters earlier in this story has also trapped the residents themselves. In the worst version of this scenario, there is simply no clear way out for the people who need to leave, and nowhere truly safe for them to go. You cannot outrun an invisible, odorless gas cloud on foot through streets blocked by collapsed buildings and buckled, shattered pavement. You cannot drive across a bridge that has already collapsed into the river below. The very infrastructure failure that makes the fire uncontrollable is the same infrastructure failure that turns a toxic release into a trap, sealing people inside the exact danger zone at the precise moment they need to leave it the most. There's one more dimension to this story that almost every piece of coverage on Cascadia leaves out entirely, and it's the timeline of the rescue response itself. After a major earthquake in a typical American city, federal disaster response begins arriving within 24 to 72 hours. Urban search and rescue teams from FEMA, National Guard units, emergency supply convoys, medical teams, the whole system works because it assumes the disaster zone still has some functioning connection to the rest of the country. Roads coming in from neighboring states, airports capable of receiving cargo aircraft, ports that can offload supplies from ships, rail lines that can carry heavy equipment. A full Cascadia rupture breaks every one of those assumptions at the exact same time. The major bridges over the Columbia River, the main artery connecting Oregon to Washington, are expected to fail outright. A 2019 study by the Oregon Department of Transportation found that the vast majority of the state's highway bridges were designed to pre-1970 seismic standards, and that many of them would become impassable after a Cascadia event. Portland International Airport sits on that same floodplain as the fuel hub, on the same liquefiable soil, and is expected to become non-functional. The Port of Portland, the most logical entry point for relief supplies arriving by ship, sits directly on the Willamette River, the same river that in this scenario would be burning. This is where Cascadia becomes genuinely different from most American disaster scenarios. After Hurricane Katrina, outside help could drive in from Texas and Georgia because those neighboring states still had working highways. After the 2011 Joplin tornado, federal teams drove in on intact interstate highways from every surrounding state. After a Cascadia rupture, the roads coming in from the east cross mountain passes on bridges that are themselves expected to fail. The airports are down. The ports are burning or flooded. FEMA's own internal planning documents for this exact scenario use language that is unusually direct for a government agency, describing an event that would exceed the capacity of state and local resources entirely, strain federal resources beyond any previous domestic disaster in American history, and require years, not months, for anything resembling full recovery. The Cascadia Fault has now been silent for 325 years. We know almost exactly when it last ruptured, January 26, 1700, because Japanese coastal historians recorded a tsunami with no earthquake attached to it, and centuries later, scientists traced that orphan wave straight back to this coastline, confirmed by ghost forests still standing in the tidal marshes today, their roots drowned in salt water from that single night. Over the past 10,000 years, this fault has produced more than 40 major ruptures, clustering in intervals of roughly 200 to 500 years. At 325 years and counting, Cascadia is statistically within the expected window for the next one. Scientists currently put the odds of a significant earthquake in the next 50 years at roughly 1 in 3. Some of what this earthquake breaks will never be rebuilt the way it was. The same pressure that has quietly pushed this coastline upward for centuries would reverse in minutes, dropping the land by up to 6 feet in some places, permanently expanding flood zones by over 100 square miles. The coastline that emerges afterward would not be the coastline anyone planned around. None of this is theoretical, and none of it requires solar storms or secret military weapons to explain, despite claims you may have read online. It is simply two enormous tectonic plates, doing what tectonic plates do, on a schedule that has already run for 10,000 years. The Cascadia Fault does not know or care about the fuel hub sitting on its most vulnerable soil, or the chemical facilities scattered across Portland, or the coastal towns built up over the last 3 centuries. It only knows the pressure between two plates. And that pressure is still building right now, quietly, while you watch this video. Emergency planning across the Pacific Northwest has traditionally told people to prepare to be self-sufficient for 72 hours, 3 days, long enough to bridge the gap until help arrives. But everything laid out in this story, months without electricity, collapsed road networks, contaminated water supplies, a coastline that will never sit where it used to. None of that is a 72-hour problem. Current guidance from the researchers and planners who have studied this most closely now recommends 2 weeks of genuine self-sufficiency at minimum, with longer timelines taken seriously. Water storage, food that needs no refrigeration or cooking fuel, medical supplies for chronic conditions, and critically, an actual relationship with the people living on your street. Because in a region without power for months, the first responders who reach you fastest will not be a federal team flying in from Atlanta. They will be your neighbors. The shaking will be the part everyone remembers. But the fire, the toxic cloud, and the coastline that never comes back may be the part that actually defines what comes after. The earthquake itself is only the trigger. What we've built around that trigger is the question we still have time left to answer.